The whistling wind carried the sound of her ragged breathing across the desolate churchyard as Nora Crawford stood frozen in her white gown, the Montana summer sun beating down mercilessly on her tear-stained face. She had waited God, how she had waited, but Preston Matthews had never arrived, leaving her standing before the entire population of Helena, Montana, in 1878 with nothing but humiliation and a bouquet of wilting wildflowers clutched in her trembling hands. "Miss Crawford." A deep voice broke through her haze of shame. "Perhaps you'd like to sit down." Nora turned, blinking back tears, to see a tall figure silhouetted against the harsh sunlight. Pastor Fleming looked at her with such pity it made her stomach turn. Behind him, she could hear the whispers already starting, could feel the stares boring into her back like hot pokers. "I don't need to sit, Pastor," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the hurricane of emotions threatening to tear her apart. "I need to leave." "Now, don't be hasty," the elderly man said, placing a weathered hand on her arm. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. Mr. Matthews could still arrive, 2 hours late," Nora said with a bitter laugh. "No, Pastor, I understand perfectly well." She turned away, desperate to escape the murmurs growing louder behind her. Her parents stood nearby, her mother's face a mask of mortification, her father's reddening with fury. The church doors remained open, mocking her with the flower-draped altar where no vows had been exchanged. "I'll escort you home, Nora," her father said, stepping forward with rigid posture that betrayed his military past. "No." Nora shook her head, backing away. I need to be alone." Without waiting for a response, she gathered her skirts and fled, ignoring her mother's call. Her white satin shoes, purchased specially for this day, slapped against the packed dirt as she ran blindly down Helena's main street. She barely registered the shocked faces of townspeople who stopped to stare at the spectacle of a bride in full wedding regalia racing through town without a groom in sight. Nora had no destination in mind, but her feet carried her instinctively toward the livery stable at the edge of town. The familiar smell of hay and horses enveloped her as she burst through the doors, startling the stable boy who nearly dropped his pitchfork. "Miss Crawford," he gasped, eyes wide at her disheveled appearance. "Tommy, I need my mare," she said, fighting to keep her voice from breaking. "Now, please." "But your dress, now." The boy scrambled to obey, returning moments later with Lily, her dappled gray mare. Without hesitation, Nora hiked up her voluminous skirts and mounted side saddle, ignoring Tommy's protests about riding alone. "Tell my parents not to worry," she called over her shoulder, knowing it was a futile request. They would worry, of course. But right now, she couldn't bear the thought of facing their disappointment and pity. She rode hard, away from town, away from the church, away from the life she'd thought she was building. The wind tore at her carefully arranged hair, sending pins flying as her chestnut locks tumbled down her back. Her veil caught on a low-hanging branch and ripped free, a white ghost disappearing into the distance. Nora had no idea how long she rode, the rhythmic pounding of Lily's hooves against the earth the only thing keeping her grounded. The sun had begun its descent toward the western mountains when she finally slowed, realizing she'd ridden farther than she'd intended. The familiar landscape had given way to rolling hills she rarely visited, near the boundary of the Peterson Ranch. Her throat burned with thirst, and Lily's sides heaved with exertion. Guilt flooded her she'd pushed her horse too hard in her blind flight from town. Ahead, she spotted a creek cutting through a stand of cottonwoods, and she guided Lily toward the water. As she dismounted, her legs nearly buckled beneath her, stiff from the long ride. Her beautiful wedding dress was now dirty and torn, the delicate lace edging ripped in several places. She sank to her knees beside the creek, cupped her hands in the cool water, and drank deeply. Then she splashed her face, washing away the dried tears and the remnants of the rouge her mother had insisted she wear. "If you're planning to drown yourself, I'd recommend a deeper spot downstream." Nora gasped, lurching to her feet and nearly losing her balance as she whirled toward the voice. A man sat astride a chestnut stallion at the edge of the trees, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He wore a battered Stetson pulled low over his eyes, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up revealing tanned forearms, and well-worn denims tucked into scuffed boots. "I'm not," she broke off, mortified. "I was just getting a drink." He dismounted in one fluid motion, removing his hat to reveal thick black hair and a face that might have been carved from the surrounding mountains, all angles and planes, weathered by sun and wind. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense like Preston, with his smooth cheeks and carefully combed blonde hair, but there was something compelling about his rugged features and the intensity of his gaze. "Patrick Ironside," he said, inclining his head slightly. "This is my land you're trespassing on, miss." "Crawford, Nora Crawford." She straightened her shoulders, suddenly conscious of her bedraggled appearance. "I apologize for the intrusion. I didn't realize I'd crossed onto your property." His eyes, a startling blue against his sun-darkened skin, traveled over her torn wedding dress, and one dark eyebrow arched. "Correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't brides usually accompanied by grooms?" The blunt question hit her like a physical blow, and to her horror, fresh tears welled in her eyes. She turned away quickly, blinking rapidly to keep them from falling. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice softening slightly. "That was unkind of me." "No," she said with a bitter laugh. "It was merely accurate." She heard him approach, his boots crunching on the rocky ground, but she didn't turn. "Would I be right in guessing that today didn't go as planned?" Nora gave a short, humorless laugh. "You could say that. Preston Matthews apparently had second thoughts about marrying the daughter of a failed rancher." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "The entire town was there to witness my humiliation." "Matthews," Patrick said, moving into her field of vision. "The banker's son," she nodded, wiping angrily at a tear that had escaped despite her efforts. "Then he's an even bigger fool than I took him for," Patrick said matter-of-factly. Nora blinked, startled by both his words and the casual way he delivered them. "You know Preston, we've had dealings." His mouth tightened briefly before he continued. "The man wouldn't know real value if it walked up and introduced itself, which apparently it did in a white dress." A strange warmth unfurled in her chest at his words, momentarily displacing the ache of betrayal. "You don't know me, Mr. Ironside." "Patrick," he corrected. "And no, I don't. But I know Matthews, and I know his loss is my gain today." "Your gain?" she frowned, confused. He smiled then, a slow, crooked smile that transformed his stern features. "The pleasure of your company, Miss Crawford, however brief and unexpected it might be." She studied him, trying to discern if he was mocking her, but his expression seemed genuine. "I should return to town," she said, suddenly aware of how late it was growing. "My parents will be worried. It's a long ride back to Helena, and you look like you could use a rest. My ranch house is just over that rise." He gestured to the west. "You're welcome to clean up and have something to eat before you head back." Suspicion flared. "That's very generous of you, Mr. Ironside, but I couldn't possibly. My housekeeper, Mrs. Donovan, will be there," he added, correctly interpreting her hesitation. "I assure you, your reputation, what's left of it after today, will remain intact." The blunt assessment of her social standing stung, but she couldn't deny its accuracy. Helena would be buzzing with gossip about the Crawford girl left at the altar. She glanced down at her ruined dress, imagining the spectacle she'd create riding back into town in this state. "Besides," Patrick continued, "your mare looks spent. She needs rest before the return journey." Nora looked at Lily, noting the way her head hung low, and felt another pang of guilt. "You're right," she admitted. "A brief stop would be appreciated. For Lily's sake." He nodded, satisfied, and returned to his stallion. "It's not far, follow me." She remounted with as much dignity as her torn dress would allow and fell in behind him, as he led the way through the cottonwoods and up a gentle slope. As they crested the hill, a ranch house came into view, not grand like the Matthews estate, but solidly built and well-maintained, with a wide porch and several outbuildings. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a large garden spread out to one side, enclosed by a sturdy fence. "It's lovely," Nora said, surprised. "It serves its purpose." Patrick's tone was neutral, but she caught a hint of pride in his sideways glance. They rode into the yard, and a plump, gray-haired woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes widened at the sight of Nora in her tattered wedding finery. "Mrs. Donovan," Patrick called, dismounting, "we have a visitor in need of some assistance." "Saints preserve us," the woman said, her Irish accent thick with concern as she hurried forward. "What's happened to you, poor child?" "Mrs. Donovan, this is Miss Crawford from Helena," Patrick said, helping Nora dismount. "She's had a difficult day and could use a place to rest before returning to town." The older woman's eyes softened with understanding. "Of course. Come inside, dearie. We'll get you cleaned up and fed." Nora allowed herself to be led into the house, grateful for the woman's matter-of-fact kindness. The interior was simply furnished but comfortable, with polished wooden floors and sturdy, well-crafted furniture. Mrs. Donovan ushered her upstairs to a small bedroom. "You can wash up in here," she said, pouring water from a pitcher into a basin. "I'll find you something to wear while I see what can be done about your dress." "Thank you, but I can't possibly—" "Nonsense," Mrs. Donovan interrupted. "That beautiful gown needs attention, and you can't ride back to town in it. I have a daughter about your size who left some things when she married and moved to Butte. I'll bring you something suitable." Before Nora could protest further, the woman had bustled out of the room. Left alone, Nora sank onto the edge of the bed, the enormity of the day's events finally crashing down on her. Preston's absence at the altar, the pitying looks, her desperate flight from town, and now finding herself in the home of a virtual stranger, it was too much. She buried her face in her hands and allowed the tears to come at last. Some time later, a gentle knock at the door roused her. She quickly wiped her face and called, "Come in." Mrs. Donovan entered, carrying a bundle of clothing. Her face softened at the sight of Nora's tear-stained cheeks. "There now, love. Whatever happened today, remember that tomorrow is a new day." Nora managed a watery smile. "Thank you. I've brought you a fresh dress and some undergarments. They might be a bit simple compared to what you're used to, but they're clean and well-made." Nora took the offered clothing gratefully. The dress was a simple blue calico, modest and practical, a far cry from the elaborate wedding gown she now wore, but perfect for the ride home. "I'll leave you to change," Mrs. Donovan said. "Come down when you're ready and I'll have some food waiting." True to her word, when Nora descended the stairs some time later, wearing the borrowed dress with her hair neatly braided, the smell of fresh baking greeted her. In the kitchen, she found Mrs. Donovan removing a tray of biscuits from the oven while a pot of stew simmered on the stove. "Ah, there you are," the housekeeper said approvingly. "You look much better. Sit down and have something to eat." Nora hadn't realized how hungry she was until a bowl of savory stew and a plate of hot biscuits were placed before her. She ate gratefully while Mrs. Donovan chattered about the ranch and the changing seasons, carefully avoiding any mention of weddings or the circumstances of Nora's arrival. As she finished her meal, Patrick appeared in the doorway. He changed into a clean shirt and washed up, his dark hair still damp at the temples. "Feeling better?" he asked, his gaze taking in her transformed appearance. "Much thank you," Nora replied, suddenly self-conscious under his scrutiny. "Your housekeeper has been very kind. Mrs. Donovan is the true mistress of this house," he said with a hint of a smile. "I just pay the bills." "And don't you forget it," the older woman retorted, but her tone was affectionate as she placed a bowl of stew before him. "Now eat before it gets cold." Patrick obeyed, taking a seat across from Nora. As they ate, he asked casual questions about her life in Helena, carefully avoiding any mention of the wedding or Preston Matthews. Nora found herself talking more freely than she'd expected, telling him about her father's struggle to maintain their small ranch after returning from the war with a permanent limp, and her own love of books and teaching. "You're a teacher?" he asked, seeming genuinely interested. "Not officially," she admitted. "I help at the schoolhouse when Miss Winters needs assistance, and I give piano lessons to several children in town." "Nora plays beautifully," Mrs. Donovan interjected, refilling their coffee cups. "I heard her at the Christmas service last year." Nora blushed. "You were in Helena for Christmas." "I go into town for supplies and special occasions," the housekeeper explained. "Patrick here prefers to avoid civilization whenever possible." Patrick shrugged, unapologetic. "I prefer the company of horses to most people." "And yet here you are, entertaining a guest," Mrs. Donovan pointed out with a meaningful glance that made Nora wonder about the relationship between employer and housekeeper. It seemed more familiar than strictly professional. "An unexpected pleasure," Patrick replied, his blue eyes meeting Nora's briefly before returning to his meal. As they finished eating, Nora noticed the light outside the windows beginning to fade. "I should start back to town," she said reluctantly. "My parents will be frantic." Patrick nodded, though she thought she detected a flicker of disappointment cross his face. "I'll ride with you. It's not safe for a woman to travel alone this time of day." "That's not necessary," Nora began, but he cut her off. "I insist. Besides, I need to explain why you're wearing Mrs. Donovan's daughter's dress instead of your wedding gown." "My wedding gown," Nora repeated softly, the reality of her situation rushing back. She would have to face the town, face the gossip and pity. Face Preston eventually. "I've hung it to dry after sponging out the worst of the dirt," Mrs. Donovan said, misinterpreting her distress. "The tears in the lace will need more careful mending. Perhaps you could return for it another time." Nora looked up, startled. "Return, of course," the housekeeper said matter-of-factly. "Unless you'd prefer I bring it to town when it's ready." "No," Nora said quickly, the thought of the woman delivering her wedding dress in front of curious neighbors making her cringe. I can come back for it." "Good," Patrick said, rising from the table. "That's settled then. I'll saddle the horses." He left and Mrs. Donovan immediately began packing a small bundle of food. "For the journey," she explained. "And I've wrapped up your wedding things. They'll fit in your saddlebag." Nora helped clear the table, feeling oddly reluctant to leave this unexpected haven. "Thank you for your kindness," she said as they finished. "I don't know what I would have done." "You would have managed," Mrs. Donovan interrupted firmly. "You strike me as a young woman of considerable strength, Miss Crawford. Today was difficult, no doubt, but you'll weather it." The simple vote of confidence from this near stranger brought tears to Nora's eyes again. "I hope you're right." "I usually am," the housekeeper said with a wink. "Now, let's get you on your way before it gets too dark." Outside, Patrick waited with both horses saddled and ready. He helped Nora mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist, then swung up onto his own stallion. "Take care of my dress, Mrs. Donovan," Nora called as they prepared to leave. "It will be waiting for you, dearie," the woman promised, waving from the porch as they rode away. They traveled in companionable silence as the sun sank lower in the sky, painting the Montana landscape in shades of gold and amber. The air grew cooler, and Nora was grateful for the shawl Mrs. Donovan had insisted she take. "May I ask you something, Miss Crawford?" Patrick said after they had ridden for some time. "You fed me, clothed me, and are now escorting me home," Nora replied. "I think you've earned the right to ask a question." His mouth quirked in that half-smile she was beginning to recognize. "Why Matthews?" "From what little I know of you and what I know of him, you seem mismatched." The directness of the question startled her, but after a moment's consideration, Nora decided to answer honestly. "He was charming, attentive, and his family's position offered security my family hasn't known in years." She paused, hearing how mercenary it sounded. "And I thought I loved him, she sighed, watching the path ahead. "Today has forced me to reconsider many things." Patrick nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. "For what it's worth, I think you've had a narrow escape." "A narrow escape from humiliation in front of the entire town?" she asked wryly. "A narrow escape from a lifetime with a man who doesn't deserve you," he corrected. "His loss is my gain today, Miss Crawford." There it was again, that phrase. "You keep saying that," she noted. "Yet I fail to see what you've gained, Mr. Ironside, beyond an unexpected dinner guest and the inconvenience of this escort." He reined his horse to a stop, forcing Nora to do the same. When she turned to look at him, his expression was serious, his blue eyes intent on her face. "The pleasure of meeting a woman of courage and grace," he said simply. "That's no small thing in this territory." Nora felt her cheeks warm under his steady gaze. "You form opinions very quickly, sir." "I trust my instincts," he replied. "They've kept me alive so far." They resumed riding, and as they neared Helena, Nora's anxiety returned. The sun had set, and lamps were being lit in windows throughout the town. She could already imagine the gossip that had surely spread during her absence. "Would you prefer I leave you here?" Patrick asked as they approached the outskirts, sensitive to her discomfort. "No," Nora said, surprising herself with her decisiveness. "Let them talk. They will anyway," he nodded, and they continued side by side down the main street. As expected, heads turned as they passed. Nora kept her back straight and her gaze forward, though she was acutely aware of the whispers that followed them. "Is that Nora Crawford? Isn't that the Peterson cowboy? Where's her wedding dress?" When they reached her parents' modest home on the eastern edge of town, lights blazed from every window. Before they had fully stopped, the front door flew open and her father limped out, followed closely by her mother. "Nora Elizabeth Crawford." Her father bellowed, relief and anger warring in his voice. "Where in God's name have you been, George? She's safe, that's what matters," her mother said, hurrying down the steps with outstretched arms. She stopped short when she noticed Patrick. "Who is this?" Nora dismounted before Patrick could assist her. "Mother, father, this is Mr. Patrick Ironside. He's been kind enough to escort me home." Her father's eyes narrowed as he assessed the cowboy still mounted on his stallion. "Ironside, from the Peterson place." "My own ranch now, sir," Patrick corrected, removing his hat respectfully. "I bought out Peterson last spring." "And how exactly did my daughter come to be in your company?" George Crawford demanded, his protective instincts clearly overriding any sense of gratitude. "Father, please," Nora interjected. "Mr. Ironside found me when I was taking some time to collect myself. He and his housekeeper showed me great kindness." Her mother looked pointedly at the blue calico dress Nora wore. "And your wedding gown." being cleaned and mended at Mr. Ironside's ranch," Nora explained, feeling a flush of embarrassment. "I'll retrieve it another time." "That won't be necessary," her father said firmly. "We can send someone." "Actually, sir," Patrick interrupted, "my housekeeper has taken a personal interest in the repairs. She'd prefer to complete them herself." George Crawford looked like he might argue further, but Nora's mother laid a restraining hand on his arm. "Thank you for seeing our daughter safely home, Mr. Ironside. We're in your debt." Patrick inclined his head. "Not at all, Mrs. Crawford. As I told your daughter, the pleasure was mine." His eyes found Nora's. "Good night, Miss Crawford. I hope to see you again soon." Before she could respond, he had replaced his hat, tipped it slightly, and turned his horse away. Nora watched him ride back toward the center of town, his straight back and broad shoulders silhouetted against the darkening sky. "Inside, young lady," her father said, breaking the spell. "You have a great deal of explaining to do." The next hours were difficult, filled with her mother's tears and her father's barely contained fury not at her, but at Preston Matthews and the humiliation he had visited upon their family. Nora recounted the day's events as calmly as she could, omitting only the depth of her own emotional breakdown at Patrick's Creek. "That boy will answer to me," George Crawford vowed, pacing their small parlor despite his painful limp. "No daughter of mine is treated this way." "George, please," Martha Crawford pleaded. "Causing a scene will only make things worse for Nora." "Worse than being abandoned at the altar," he demanded. "Yes," Nora said quietly. "Worse. Please, Father, let it be. Preston has made his choice. Creating a scandal won't change that." Her father stopped pacing, his weathered face softening as he looked at her. "When did you become so wise, little one?" "When she grew up without us noticing," her mother said with a sad smile. "Our Nora has always had a level head." "A level head that was turned by that smooth-talking banker's son," her father muttered, but the heat had gone out of his words. "I was partly to blame," Nora admitted. "I wanted to believe in the future he promised financial security, social standing." She looked down at her hands. "I convinced myself it was love." Her mother moved to sit beside her on the settee, taking her hands. "And now I know it wasn't," Nora said simply. "Which makes today a blessing in disguise, I suppose. Better to discover it before the vows than after." Her parents exchanged glances, seemingly relieved by her pragmatic attitude. "Well," her father said, clearing his throat, "it's been a long day. We should all get some rest." Nora rose, grateful for the reprieve. "Good night, Mother, Father, and I'm sorry for running off and causing you worry." Her mother embraced her. "We're just thankful you're safe, though I'm curious about this Mr. Ironside. I don't recall you mentioning him before." "We only met today," Nora explained. "He was unexpectedly kind, her mother hummed noncommittally. "Well, he seemed like a gentleman escorting you home." "He is," Nora said, then added hastily, "Good night." In her room, Nora sat at her small dressing table, brushing out her long hair and reflecting on the day's dramatic turns. When she'd awakened that morning, she'd been full of nervous anticipation, preparing to become Mrs. Preston Matthews. Now, as she prepared for sleep, she found herself wondering not about Preston's whereabouts or reasons, but about the quiet ranch house on the Peterson Knoll, the Ironside property and its enigmatic owner. "His loss is my gain," he'd said. Such a strange thing to say to a woman he'd just met, especially one in such distress. And yet, there had been no mockery in his words, only a simple statement of fact, as if he truly considered meeting her a fortunate occurrence. Nora placed her brush down and looked at her reflection in the small mirror. The face that looked back at her was the same one she'd carefully prepared for her wedding day, yet somehow changed. There was a new awareness in her eyes, a hard-won wisdom that hadn't been there before. "Tomorrow is a new day," she whispered, echoing Mrs. Donovan's words. And for the first time since she'd stood alone at the altar, Nora felt a flicker of curiosity about what that new day might bring. The next morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect late spring day that seemed to mock Nora's inner turmoil. She lay in bed longer than usual, dreading the prospect of facing the town after yesterday's humiliation. Eventually, though, the sounds of her mother preparing breakfast roused her, and she forced herself to dress and go downstairs. "Good morning, dear," her mother said, too brightly. "I've made your favorite blueberry pancakes." Nora managed a small smile, recognizing the gesture for what it was, an attempt to normalize an impossible situation. "Thank you, Mother. Your father's already gone to the ranch," Martha continued, setting a plate before her. "He thought it best to keep busy today." Nora nodded, understanding. The small ranch her father had purchased after the war barely supported their family, and he couldn't afford to neglect it, even in times of personal crisis. "And what are your plans for the day?" her mother asked carefully. Nora pushed a piece of pancake around her plate. "I should go see Miss Winters at the school. She was expecting me to be away on my trip. But since that's no longer happening, I should let her know I'm available to help with the children." Her mother's face creased with concern. "Are you certain that's wise?" "Perhaps you should wait a few days before facing everyone," Nora interrupted gently. "No, Mother. Hiding will only make it worse. Better to face it directly." Martha Crawford studied her daughter's face, then nodded slowly. "You've always been stronger than I gave you credit for, Nora." "I'm not strong," Nora confessed. "I'm terrified, but I refuse to let Preston Matthews dictate how I live my life by hiding away in shame." "Well, you won't have to face town alone," her mother declared, straightening her shoulders. "I need to visit the general store today. We'll go together." Nora felt a rush of gratitude for her mother's solidarity. "Thank you." After breakfast, they donned their bonnets and set out for town. Nora could feel the stares as soon as they turned onto the main street, curious glances from windows, whispers behind hands, conversations that halted abruptly as they approached. She kept her chin up, though her stomach churned with anxiety. At the general store, Mr. Thompson, the owner, greeted them with exaggerated cheerfulness. "Mrs. Crawford, Miss Crawford. Lovely day, isn't it? What can I help you with today?" "Just a few essentials, Mr. Thompson," Martha replied evenly, as if this were any ordinary shopping trip. While her mother selected items, Nora wandered toward the book section, seeking comfort in the familiar spines of novels and poetry collections. She was examining a new edition of Tennyson when she heard a voice that made her blood run cold. "I still can't believe he just didn't show up." "No message, nothing." "Well, I heard from my cousin who works at the bank that Preston Matthews left town entirely. Took the morning stage to Bozeman the day before the wedding." "No, you mean he planned it all along, apparently." And poor Nora Crawford standing there in her white dress, waiting and waiting. Nora's hands tightened on the book she was holding. So Preston hadn't simply gotten cold feet at the last moment he'd deliberately left town, knowing full well what would happen. The betrayal cut even deeper than she'd imagined. "Actually," a new voice interjected, deep and familiar, "I believe Miss Crawford showed remarkable dignity in a difficult situation. Not everyone would have managed so well." Nora turned to see Patrick Ironside standing at the end of the aisle, his tall frame blocking the view of the gossiping women, who had fallen silent at his intervention. "Mr. Ironside," she said, surprised. "I didn't expect to see you in town today." "Supply run," he explained, moving toward her. "Mrs. Donovan has a lengthy list." His voice lowered. "Are you all right? You look pale." "I'm fine," she said automatically, then reconsidered. "Actually, no. I just learned that Preston left town before the wedding. He knew he wouldn't be there." Patrick's expression darkened. "As I said yesterday, you've had a narrow escape, Miss Crawford." Before she could respond, her mother appeared at her side, her basket full of purchases. "Mr. Ironside," she acknowledged with a nod. "We meet again, Mrs. Crawford." He touched the brim of his hat respectfully. "I was just telling your daughter that I'm in town for supplies." "And how is your housekeeper's progress with Nora's gown?" Martha asked, her tone neutral but her eyes watchful. "Coming along well from what she tells me," Patrick replied. "She's quite determined to restore it to its original condition." "That's very kind, but really not necessary," Martha began, but Nora interrupted. "I told Mrs. Donovan I would come for it myself when it's ready," she said firmly. "I keep my promises, Mother." Patrick's eyes warmed at her words. "As do I, Miss Crawford. In fact, I promised Mrs. Donovan I would extend an invitation. She wonders if you might join us for Sunday dinner this weekend. She'd like to show you her progress on the gown." Nora hesitated, aware of her mother's questioning gaze. "That's very kind, but we'd be delighted," Martha surprised her by saying. "Both my husband and I would like to properly thank you and your housekeeper for your assistance yesterday." Patrick looked momentarily taken aback, then recovered smoothly. "Of course, you're all welcome. Around noon." "We'll be there," Martha confirmed, then glanced meaningfully at the store clock. "And now, Nora, we should continue our errands. Miss Winters will be expecting you." After brief farewells, Nora followed her mother to the counter to pay for their purchases. As soon as they were outside, she turned to Martha in confusion. "Mother, why did you accept that invitation? I thought you were concerned about me visiting the Ironside Ranch." Martha adjusted her bonnet before answering. "I am concerned, which is why we're all going. I want to see this Mr. Ironside in his natural environment, so to speak." "He's not a specimen to be studied," Nora protested. Her mother gave her a knowing look. "No, but he is a single man who appears to have taken an interest in my daughter one day after she was jilted at the altar." "Forgive me for being cautious. It's not like that," Nora insisted. "He was simply being kind." "Perhaps," Martha conceded, "but I saw how he looked at you in the store just now, and it wasn't simply kindness in his eyes." Nora felt her cheeks warm. "You're imagining things." "We'll see," her mother said cryptically. "Now, off to the school with you. I have more shopping to do." Still unsettled by her mother's observations, Nora made her way to the small schoolhouse at the edge of town. The building was quiet, the children having been dismissed for lunch. Inside, Miss Winters, the town's schoolteacher, looked up from her desk in surprise. "Nora, I didn't expect to see you today." Her expression turned sympathetic. "I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry." "Thank you," Nora said, setting down her reticule. "Since I'm not going to be away after all, I thought I might resume helping with the younger children's reading lessons." Miss Winters' eyes widened. "Are you certain? No one would think less of you if you needed some time to recover." "I'm certain," Nora said firmly. "Keeping busy will help, I think." The older woman studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. The children will be delighted. They've missed you this past week." The afternoon passed quickly, as Nora lost herself in the familiar routine of helping the youngest students with their letters and reading simple stories aloud to the group. The children, bless them, asked no awkward questions about weddings or missing grooms. Their uncomplicated acceptance was a balm to her wounded spirit. When the school day ended, Nora helped Miss Winters tidy up before preparing to leave. As she stepped outside, she was surprised to find Patrick Ironside waiting, leaning against a hitching post with his horse tethered nearby. "Mr. Ironside," she said, startled. "Is something wrong?" "Not at all," he replied, straightening. "I was on my way out of town and thought I might offer you a ride home. It's a warm afternoon for walking." Nora glanced around, aware of curious eyes watching from across the street. "That's very kind, but my home isn't far." "I'm aware," he said with that hint of a smile. "Consider it a selfish request. I'd welcome the company for a short while longer." She hesitated, torn between propriety and the undeniable pull she felt toward this man. "People will talk," she warned. "They already are," he pointed out reasonably. "Would you rather give them accurate information to discuss, or leave them to their imaginations?" The logic made her smile despite herself. "When you put it that way, a short ride seems the lesser evil." He helped her mount his horse, then swung up behind her. The arrangement was far more intimate than riding side by side, and Nora was acutely aware of his solid presence at her back, his arms on either side of her as he held the reins. "Miss Winters seemed surprised to see me," Patrick commented as they moved down the street at a leisurely pace. "Do you often help at the school?" "3 times a week usually," Nora explained, grateful for the neutral topic. "I enjoy teaching, and Miss Winters appreciates the extra help with the younger children." "You have a natural way with them," he observed. "I watched through the window for a few minutes before the dismissal bell." "That sounds rather ominous, Mr. Ironside," she teased, surprising herself with the lightness in her tone. "Are you in the habit of spying on schoolrooms?" "Only when they contain particularly intriguing teachers," he replied, his voice closer to her ear than she'd expected, sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. They continued in companionable conversation until they reached her home. No one appeared to be there, her father likely still at their small ranch and her mother perhaps still in town. Patrick dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. His hands at her waist were strong and sure, and he held her a moment longer than strictly necessary after her feet touched the ground. "Thank you for the ride, Mr. Ironside," she said, stepping back slightly. "Patrick," he corrected, as he had before. "After all, you'll be a guest in my home on Sunday. We should dispense with formalities." "Patrick," she agreed. "Then you must call me Nora." "Nora," he repeated, as if testing how the name felt on his tongue. "I look forward to Sunday then." "As do I," she admitted. "Though I should warn you, my father can be somewhat protective." He smiled fully then, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered features. "I would expect nothing less. Until Sunday, Nora." She watched him ride away, conflicted emotions swirling within her. It seemed impossible that just yesterday she had been prepared to marry another man. Yet here she stood, looking forward to seeing Patrick Ironside again with an anticipation that both confused and excited her. The days leading up to Sunday passed in a blur of routine activities and careful avoidance of certain locations in town specifically. The bank where Preston worked, and the cafe where they had often taken tea together. Nora threw herself into her teaching at the school and her piano lessons with local children, finding solace in the familiar activities. At home, her parents maintained a careful balance between concern and respect for her privacy. Her father had returned from the ranch on Wednesday evening full of subdued anger after hearing confirmation of Preston's deliberate departure before the wedding. "If that young man shows his face in Helena again, he'll have me to answer to," George Crawford declared over dinner. "Let it go, Father," Nora urged. "He's made his choice. I've made mine to move forward with dignity." George studied his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. "You've always been the sensible one in this family," he said finally. "But don't bury your feelings, Nora. It's all right to be angry, to grieve." "I have been," she assured him, "but dwelling on it won't change anything." She hesitated, then added, "and perhaps Perhaps it was for the best. I'm not sure we would have been happy together. Her parents exchanged glances but didn't press the issue. By Sunday morning, Nora found herself facing a new dilemma: what to wear for the visit to the Ironside ranch. She stood before her wardrobe, discarding option after option. "The blue cotton," her mother said from the doorway, startling her. "It brings out your eyes." Nora turned, self-conscious. "Is it appropriate for a dinner visit? It's a ranch house, not the governor's mansion," Martha pointed out practically. "Besides, Mr. Ironside has already seen you in borrowed clothes and a ruined wedding dress. I think a simple blue cotton will be perfectly acceptable." There was wisdom in her mother's words, so Nora donned the blue dress, arranging her hair in a simple but elegant style. As she secured the last pin, she caught herself wondering if Patrick would approve, then immediately chided herself for the thought. His opinion shouldn't matter to her, not so soon after Preston's betrayal, not when her heart was still healing. Yet as their wagon approached the Ironside ranch just before noon, Nora couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation in her stomach. The property looked even more impressive in full daylight: well-maintained fences, healthy livestock grazing in nearby pastures, and the house itself solid and welcoming with smoke curling from the chimney. Patrick emerged from the barn as they pulled into the yard, wiping his hands on a cloth. He wore clean denims and a fresh shirt, his dark hair damp as if recently washed. "Right on time," he called, striding toward them with that easy, confident gait that Nora was beginning to recognize. "Welcome to my home, Mr. and Mrs. Crawford." He helped Martha down from the wagon first, then turned to assist Nora. Their eyes met briefly as his hands encircled her waist, and she felt that now familiar spark of awareness ignite between them. "Blue suits you," he murmured, so quietly that only she could hear. Before she could formulate a response, her father had joined them, and Patrick was extending his hand in greeting. "Mr. Crawford, I'm glad you could come. I understand you run a small ranch yourself." "Nothing on this scale," George admitted, looking around appreciatively. "Just enough to supplement my pension." "You were military?" Patrick asked, leading them toward the house. "Union cavalry," George confirmed, "until Gettysburg gave me this souvenir." He tapped his bad leg with his walking stick. Patrick nodded respectfully. "I was too young for that fight, but my father served. Ohio infantry." The men fell into easy conversation about the war as they approached the house, where Mrs. Donovan waited on the porch, beaming with pleasure. "Welcome, welcome," she called, hurrying forward to greet them. "It's so lovely to have guests. Come in, dinner's nearly ready." The housekeeper ushered them into the parlor, a comfortable room with solid furniture and surprisingly elegant touches. Good books lined the shelves, and a beautiful quilt adorned the back of the sofa. Nora noted a piano in one corner, well used but well maintained. "You play, Mr. Ironside?" she asked, gesturing toward the instrument. "Badly," he admitted with a smile. "It came with the house and Mrs. Donovan refuses to let me sell it. She claims it civilizes the place." "And so it does," the housekeeper declared as she brought in a tray of refreshments. "A home needs music, even if the master of the house can't tell one note from another." "Perhaps Nora could play for us after dinner," Martha suggested. "She's quite accomplished." "Mother," Nora protested quietly, embarrassed by the praise. "I'd like that very much," Patrick said, his eyes meeting hers. "If you're willing." Something in his gaze made it impossible to refuse. "Of course," she agreed. Conversation flowed easily as they enjoyed Mrs. Donovan's refreshments, with Patrick describing how he'd come to purchase the Peterson ranch after working as a foreman there for several years. Old Peterson had no sons, and his daughter married a banker in St. Louis with no interest in ranching, he explained. I'd been saving my wages, and when he decided to join his daughter back east, we struck a deal. A remarkable achievement for a young man, George observed, clearly impressed despite himself. I'm not so young, Patrick replied with a wry smile. 33 next month, and I've been working ranches since I was 16. The conversation shifted to cattle prices and the challenges of the previous winter as Mrs. Donovan excused herself to finish dinner preparations. Nora offered to help, following the older woman to the kitchen. "You have a lovely home," she said sincerely as she helped arrange biscuits in a basket. "It's Patrick's home," Mrs. Donovan corrected. "I just keep it running smoothly." "You seem more like family than employee," Nora observed. The housekeeper smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "I've known that boy since he was 17, all gangly limbs and determination. Came to work at my late husband's ranch in Colorado with nothing but the clothes on his back and a willingness to work harder than any two men combined." "You followed him here to Montana?" Nora asked, surprised. Mrs. Donovan nodded. "After my Thomas passed, there wasn't much keeping me in Colorado. When Patrick wrote that he'd bought this place and needed help managing it, I didn't hesitate. He's the son I never had." The simple explanation touched Nora deeply. "He's fortunate to have you." "We're fortunate to have each other," the older woman corrected, then gave Nora an appraising look. "And he seemed quite fortunate to have stumbled upon you by that creek, if you don't mind my saying so." Nora felt her cheeks warm. It was a difficult day. He was kind. "Patrick Ironside is many things hardworking, honest, stubborn as the day is long, but kind to strangers isn't usually one of them," Mrs. Donovan said with a knowing smile. "Now, would you mind taking these biscuits to the table? Dinner's ready." The meal was delicious roast beef, mashed potatoes, fresh vegetables from the garden, and Mrs. Donovan's exceptional biscuits. Conversation remained pleasant, though Nora noticed her father watching Patrick with a measuring gaze throughout the meal. When they had finished and retired once more to the parlor for coffee, Mrs. Donovan disappeared briefly, returning with a carefully wrapped bundle. "Your wedding gown, my dear," she said, presenting it to Nora. "Good as new, I think. The lace took some doing, but I managed to repair all the tears." Nora accepted the package, unexpectedly moved by the woman's efforts. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed," Mrs. Donovan assured her. "It's a beautiful gown. It deserved to be restored, whatever its future might be. Perhaps you could play something for us now, Nora." Patrick suggested, gesturing toward the piano, grateful for the diversion. Nora moved to the instrument, setting the wrapped gown carefully aside. She tested the keys, pleased to find the piano well-tuned despite Patrick's admission that he didn't play. After a moment's consideration, she began a piece by Chopin not too somber, but with enough emotional depth to express the complicated feelings swirling within her. As she played, she lost herself in the music, allowing it to wash away the lingering hurt and confusion of the past week. When the final notes faded, she looked up to find Patrick watching her with an expression of such intense appreciation that it took her breath away. "That was beautiful," he said simply. "Truly lovely, dear," her mother agreed, "but perhaps something a bit more cheerful now." Nora obliged with a livelier piece, and soon Mrs. Donovan was tapping her foot in time with the music. When she finished, everyone applauded and Patrick moved to stand beside the piano. "Would you show me?" he asked, gesturing to the keys. "Just a simple tune. Mrs. Donovan is right, a home should have music." Surprised by the request, Nora nodded and shifted on the bench to make room for him. As he sat beside her, their shoulders brushing, she became acutely aware of his proximity, the clean, masculine scent of him, the slight roughness of his hands as she positioned his fingers on the keys. "Like this," she demonstrated, playing a simple melody. Now you try." He followed her instructions with careful concentration, his brow furrowed in effort as he attempted to replicate the tune. His first attempt was halting, but he persisted, and by the third try, the melody was recognizable. "A natural talent," Mrs. Donovan declared with obvious pride. "Hardly," Patrick chuckled, "but perhaps not entirely hopeless." His shoulder pressed against Nora's as he turned to look at her. With the right teacher. The implication hung in the air between them, and Nora found herself unable to look away from his intent blue gaze. It was her father's pointed clearing of throat that finally broke the moment. "It's getting late," George announced. "We should start back to town before we lose the light." "Of course," Patrick agreed, standing from the piano bench. "I appreciate you all coming today." As they prepared to leave, gathering Nora's restored wedding gown and thanking Mrs. Donovan for the meal, Patrick drew Nora slightly aside. "I have business in Helena on Tuesday," he said quietly. "Would you consider having lunch with me at the hotel restaurant?" Nora hesitated, aware of her mother's watchful gaze from across the room. "People will talk," she warned for the second time. "Let them," he replied. "Unless you're concerned about what they might say," she considered this. The town was already buzzing with gossip about her failed wedding. Would lunch with Patrick really make it worse? And even if it did she care? 1 o'clock, she suggested. His smile was answer enough. "I'll meet you there." The ride back to town was filled with her parents' observations about the ranch, the meal, and their hosts. To Nora's surprise, her father seemed genuinely impressed by Patrick. "He's built something substantial there," George noted. "And he knows his business. Not many men his age could manage a spread that size so effectively." "Mrs. Donovan is a treasure," Martha added. "Such a practical, sensible woman." Nora listened to their approval with relief, though she wasn't entirely sure why their opinion mattered so much to her. It wasn't as if she was considering, what exactly, a courtship, so soon after Preston. Yet as she prepared for bed that night, carefully hanging the restored wedding gown in the back of her wardrobe, Nora couldn't deny the anticipation she felt at the prospect of seeing Patrick again on Tuesday. There was something compelling about him, a steadiness, a quiet confidence that drew her in despite her best intentions to guard her heart. "This is madness," she whispered to herself in the darkness of her room. "Complete madness." But when she finally slept, it was Patrick's blue eyes and rare smile that followed her into her dreams, not Preston's betrayal. Monday dragged interminably, filled with routine tasks that did little to distract Nora from thoughts of the coming lunch engagement. By Tuesday morning, she was a bundle of nerves, changing her dress twice before settling on a green cotton that her mother had always said complemented her fair coloring. "I'm having lunch with a friend today," she informed her mother casually, as she prepared to leave for her morning piano lessons with the Henderson children. Martha looked up from her mending with raised eyebrows. "A friend?" Nora busied herself with her reticule, avoiding her mother's knowing gaze. "Mr. Ironside is in town on business. He asked if I would join him for lunch at the hotel restaurant." "I see," Martha said neutrally. "And are you concerned about what people might say?" "It's been less than 2 weeks since I was humiliated at the altar." "Yes, Mother, I'm well aware of the calendar." Nora sighed, immediately regretting her sharp tone. "I'm sorry, I don't see why I should hide away as if I've done something wrong. Preston is the one who left, not me." Martha set aside her sewing and approached her daughter, taking Nora's hands in hers. "You've done nothing wrong," she agreed firmly. "And you have every right to dine with whomever you choose. I just want to be certain you're not rushing into something new to escape the pain of what happened." "It's just lunch, Mother," Nora said, though even she wasn't entirely convinced of the statement's truth. "Nothing more." Martha studied her face for a long moment. "Mr. Ironside seems like a good man," she said finally. "Just be careful with your heart, Nora. It's still healing whether you acknowledge it or not." "I will," Nora promised, leaning in to kiss her mother's cheek. "I should go. Mrs. Henderson is expecting me." The morning passed quickly, and at 1:15, Nora found herself approaching the Grand Hotel, the finest establishment in Helena. Her steps slowed as she neared the entrance, suddenly self-conscious. Would people stare, whisper, judge her for appearing in public with another man so soon after being jilted? Miss Crawford. She turned to find Patrick approaching from the direction of the livery stable, looking remarkably different in a clean suit and polished boots. His dark hair was neatly combed, though a rebellious lock still fell across his forehead in a way that made her fingers itch to brush it back. "Mr. Ironside," she greeted him, suddenly shy. "You look very gentlemanly today." He grimaced slightly, tugging at his collar. "I clean up adequately for business meetings, though I'll be grateful to return to more practical attire later." His expression softened as he took in her appearance. "You, however, look lovely in any setting." The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have. "Thank you. Shall we?" He offered his arm, and after only the briefest hesitation, she placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. As they entered the hotel restaurant together, Nora was acutely aware of the conversation that briefly halted, the heads that turned in their direction. She kept her chin up, refusing to show any sign of discomfort as Patrick led her to a table near the window. "The curious will tire eventually," he commented quietly as he held her chair. "Small towns have short attention spans when it comes to gossip." "You sound like a man with experience in the matter," she observed as he took his seat across from her. A shadow crossed his face briefly. "Let's just say I understand what it's like to be the subject of speculation." Before she could inquire further, a waiter appeared to take their orders. Once they were alone again, Patrick steered the conversation to safer topics: her teaching, his cattle business, books they had both read. "I noticed your collection of Dickens," Nora mentioned as they enjoyed their meal. "I wouldn't have expected a rancher to be so well read." "Because ranchers are typically uneducated brutes?" he asked with a raised eyebrow, though his tone was more amused than offended. "No, of course not," she said hastily. "I just meant, that is." She trailed off, embarrassed. "I'm teasing you, Nora," Patrick said, his eyes crinkling with humor. "My mother was a school teacher before she married. She ensured I had a proper education even after she passed, and I was left to make my own way." "You lost your mother young?" Nora asked softly. He nodded, his expression growing more serious. "I was 14. Influenza." "My father followed less than a year later. Grief, I think, as much as the lung sickness that took him." "I'm so sorry," she said, instinctively reaching across the table to touch his hand. He turned his palm up, capturing her fingers briefly before she could withdraw. "It was a long time ago," he said simply. "But her books are among the few possessions I've carried with me over the years. They're a connection to her, I suppose." The personal revelation touched Nora deeply. This man, who appeared so self-sufficient and strong, had known loss and carried his own quiet griefs. It made her feel less alone in her own pain. "What about your family?" he asked, releasing her hand. "Have they always been in Helena?" "No, we came west after the war," she explained. Father's injury made it difficult for him to resume his previous work as a carpenter in Pennsylvania, and the doctor suggested the drier climate might help his health. "We started with a small claim near Bozeman, but eventually moved here when an opportunity arose to purchase a modest ranch on better terms." As they continued to share stories of their pasts, Nora was surprised at how easily conversation flowed between them. There was none of the performance she'd often felt with Preston, no careful monitoring of her words, to ensure they aligned with his expectations of a banker's wife. With Patrick, she found herself speaking honestly about her hopes, her disappointments, even her frustrations with the limitations placed on women in their society. "You should have been able to attend university," he said, when she mentioned her thwarted academic aspirations. "You have the mind for it." "Thank you," she replied, genuinely touched by his understanding. "But such opportunities are rare for women, especially those without substantial financial resources." "Perhaps that will change in time," he suggested. "The world is evolving slowly but surely." "Are you a progressive, Mr. Ironside?" she asked, intrigued by this unexpected perspective. "I believe in recognizing ability wherever it exists," he replied thoughtfully. "I've known too many intelligent women, my mother, Mrs. Donovan, you to subscribe to the notion that your sex determines your capabilities." It was exactly the sort of sentiment Preston would never have expressed, valuing instead a woman's decorative qualities and domestic skills. The contrast struck Nora forcefully, making her wonder how she could have been so blind to the fundamental differences in character between the two men. As their meal concluded, Nora reluctantly acknowledged that she needed to return home. Patrick settled the bill and escorted her outside, where they paused on the hotel's broad porch. "Thank you for joining me today," he said, his voice lowered for privacy despite the relatively busy street before them. "I've enjoyed your company immensely." "As have I," she admitted. "It was unexpected." "The enjoyment?" he asked with that hint of a smile she was coming to anticipate. "The ease of it," she clarified. "I didn't expect to feel so comfortable." His expression grew more serious. "Nora, I know it's too soon after what happened with Matthews. I'm not asking for anything more than the pleasure of your company when opportunities arise. But I want to be clear, my interest in you is genuine, not merely kindness to a woman in distress." The directness of his statement both thrilled and frightened her. "I don't know what to say," she confessed. "Everything is still so confused in my mind." "Then say nothing for now," he suggested. "Just know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I would very much like to court you properly." Court her. The traditional phrase struck Nora as both old-fashioned and refreshingly honest compared to Preston's flowery declarations of undying devotion that had proven so hollow. "I should go," she said, unable to formulate a proper response to his straightforward statement of intent. He nodded, respecting her need for space. "I'll be in town again next week, perhaps another lunch." Despite her confusion, Nora found herself nodding. "I'd like that. Until then." He took her hand briefly, his touch warm and sure, then released it and descended the hotel steps, leaving her to make her way home with much to consider. The following weeks established a pattern. Patrick would come to town for business once or twice a week, and they would meet for lunch or sometimes a walk in the town's small park. Each encounter deepened Nora's appreciation for his quiet intelligence, dry humor, and unwavering honesty. In between their meetings, she threw herself into her teaching work with renewed vigor, finding satisfaction in the children's progress and Miss Winter's growing reliance on her assistance. She even began to venture out socially again, attending church functions and community gatherings with her head held high despite the occasional whispered comment or pitying glance. Preston Matthews returned to Helena exactly 1 month after the failed wedding, slipping quietly back into town and resuming his position at his father's bank as if nothing had happened. Nora first became aware of his return when she encountered him unexpectedly on the street outside the general store. "Nora," he said, tipping his hat as if they were mere acquaintances. "You're looking well." She stood frozen for a moment, the shock of seeing him rendering her temporarily speechless. He appeared unchanged, handsome in his tailored suit, his blonde hair neatly combed, his smile confident if somewhat cautious. "Preston," she finally managed, her voice steadier than she would have expected. "I'm surprised to see you back in Helena." "Yes, well, my father's business requires my presence," he explained, as if that justified everything. "I trust you're recovered from our unfortunate situation." "Unfortunate situation," Nora repeated incredulously. "Is that what you call abandoning me at the altar without so much as a note of explanation?" His smile faltered. "Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere more private. People are watching." "Let them," Nora said, echoing Patrick's words from weeks before. "I have nothing to hide, Preston. I wasn't the one who fled town to avoid facing the consequences of my actions." A flash of annoyance crossed his handsome features. "I see you've developed quite a sharp tongue in my absence. That's hardly becoming." "And I see you remain as concerned with appearances as ever," she retorted. "Goodbye, Preston." She moved to step around him, but he caught her arm. "Nora, wait. I truly am sorry for how things transpired. If I could explain, I'm not interested in your explanations," she interrupted, pulling free of his grasp. "Whatever your reasons, your actions revealed your character quite clearly. I consider myself fortunate to have discovered it before vows were exchanged." Without waiting for his response, she continued on her way, heart pounding but head high. It was only after she turned the corner that she allowed herself to lean against a building, taking deep breaths to steady her nerves. "Are you all right, Miss Crawford?" She looked up to find Sheriff Wilson watching her with concern. A kind man in his 50s who had known her family since their arrival in Helena, he had been notably absent from her wedding day due to duties elsewhere. "I'm fine, thank you, Sheriff," she assured him. "Just a difficult encounter with young Matthews," he guessed shrewdly. "I heard he slunk back into town yesterday. Takes some nerve, showing his face here after what he did." "Yes, well, the Matthews family has always enjoyed certain privileges in Helena," Nora said diplomatically. The sheriff's weathered face creased in a frown. "Money only buys so much forgiveness, Miss Crawford. Some actions leave a stain no amount of banking power can wash clean." His support warmed her. "Thank you, Sheriff. No need for thanks, just stating facts." He touched the brim of his hat. "You take care now. And if Matthews gives you any trouble, you let me know." By the time Patrick arrived for their scheduled lunch the following day, the entire town was buzzing with news of the encounter between Nora and her former fiancé. She had already endured her father's renewed rage, the audacity of that boy, and her mother's anxious fretting. "Perhaps we should visit my sister in Denver for a time, until the gossip dies down." "I hear Matthews has returned," Patrick said without preamble as they took their seats at what had become their regular table by the window. "News travels fast," Nora observed dryly. "It's a small town." He studied her face. "Are you all right?" "Surprisingly, yes," she replied truthfully. "Seeing him was less devastating than I had feared. In fact, it was rather illuminating." How so? She considered this. "I realized that what I felt wasn't heartbreak or even anger, really. It was relief. Relief that I didn't marry a man who could treat anyone with such callous disregard, let alone the woman he claimed to love." Patrick nodded slowly. "That's a valuable realization." "It is," she agreed. "Though I wish it hadn't come at the cost of public humiliation." "Sometimes the most important lessons are the most painful to learn," he said. After a brief pause, he added, "I once lost nearly everything I owned trusting the wrong business partner. It was a harsh lesson, but one I've never forgotten." "Is that why you prefer to work alone now?" she asked, sensing there was more to the story. "Partly," he acknowledged. though Mrs. Donovan might take exception to the suggestion that I work entirely alone. The mention of the housekeeper brought a smile to Nora's face. She would indeed. She's very protective of you. As I am of her, he said simply. We've been through much together. Their conversation shifted to lighter topics as they enjoyed their meal, but as they prepared to leave, Patrick surprised her with an unexpected invitation. There's a social at the Grange Hall this Saturday, he said. Would you consider attending with me? Nora hesitated. Lunch meetings in town were one thing, but a social dance was a much more public declaration of whatever was developing between them. I understand if it's too soon, he added, perceiving her hesitation, or if you'd prefer not to face Matthews in such a setting. It's not that, she assured him. People will assume that we're courting. His blue eyes held hers steadily. Would that be so terrible, Nora? The directness of the question took her breath away. Would it be terrible? 6 weeks ago, she had been prepared to marry another man. Was her heart truly ready to consider a new attachment? But even as she questioned herself, she knew the answer. What she felt for Patrick was nothing like what she had felt for Preston. It was deeper somehow, more grounded in reality rather than romantic fantasy. Preston had courted her with flowery words and grand gestures. Patrick offered honest conversation and quiet respect. No, she said finally. It wouldn't be terrible at all. The smile that transformed his features was worth any gossip they might face. Then I'll call for you at 7 on Saturday. When Nora informed her parents of the invitation that evening, their reactions were mixed. Her father, who had developed a grudging respect for Patrick during their Sunday visit and subsequent encounters in town, merely nodded his approval. Her mother, however, was more cautious. Are you certain you're ready for such a public outing, dear? Martha asked as they washed dishes together after dinner. You know everyone will be watching, especially with Preston back in town. Let them watch, Nora said with newfound confidence. I've done nothing wrong, Mother. And neither has Patrick. No, you haven't, Martha agreed. But the heart doesn't always heal according to convenient timetables. I would hate to see you rush into something new only to discover you're still harboring feelings for Preston. Nora set down the plate she was drying and turned to face her mother directly. I harbor no feelings for Preston Matthews except perhaps gratitude that he revealed his true character before we were wed, she said firmly. What I feel for Patrick is different. Stronger in some ways, though we've known each other such a short time. Martha studied her daughter's face, then nodded slowly. I believe you, she said. Just be careful, Nora. Mr. Ironside strikes me as a man who loves deeply and permanently. Don't encourage him unless you're prepared to return such feelings. The insight gave Nora pause. Was she prepared? The question lingered in her mind as she selected her dress for the social, as she arranged her hair in a more elaborate style than usual, as she waited nervously by the window for Patrick's arrival on Saturday evening. When his wagon pulled up precisely at 7, her heart leaped in a way that answered her question more definitively than any amount of introspection could have done. Yes, she was prepared, or at least, she was willing to discover if what was growing between them could blossom into something lasting. The Grange Hall was already bustling with activity when they arrived, lanterns casting a warm glow over the gathered townspeople. Music from a small group of local musicians filled the air, and several couples were already dancing. Nora felt the weight of curious gazes as Patrick escorted her inside, his hand warm and steady at the small of her back. Miss Crawford, Mr. Ironside, Mayor Thompson greeted them near the entrance, his wife smiling beside him. Lovely to see you both this evening. Mayor, Mrs. Thompson, Patrick replied with a respectful nod. It's a fine turnout tonight. Indeed it is, Mrs. Thompson agreed, her eyes moving between Patrick and Nora with undisguised curiosity. The whole town seems to have come out to enjoy the music. The whole town including, Nora noted with a sinking feeling, Preston Matthews, who stood near the refreshment table with his parents and several bank associates. He met her gaze briefly across the room, his expression unreadable before he deliberately turned away. "Would you care to dance?" Patrick asked, drawing her attention back to him. "I would love to," she replied, grateful for his steady presence as he led her onto the dance floor. The musicians were playing a waltz, and as Patrick's arm encircled her waist, Nora was struck by how naturally they moved together. He was surprisingly graceful for such a powerful man, guiding her through the steps with confident ease. "You dance well, Mr. Ironside," she observed, smiling up at him. "My mother insisted I learn," he replied, a rare touch of mischief in his eyes. She claimed no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a newborn colt. The image made Nora laugh, drawing curious glances from nearby couples. "I wish I could have met her. She sounds remarkable." "She would have liked you," he said with certainty. "She valued intelligence and courage above all else." "You think me courageous?" Nora asked, surprised. His expression grew serious. "I think facing this town after what happened, holding your head high despite the gossip, takes considerable courage. I admire it greatly." His words warmed her in a way that had nothing to do with the crowded dance floor. "Thank you," she said simply. They continued dancing, moving from the waltz to a lively reel that had them laughing breathlessly by its conclusion. As they paused for refreshment, several of Nora's friends approached, their initial awkwardness giving way to genuine warmth as the evening progressed. "You and Mr. Ironside seem well matched," her friend Sarah Wilson commented as they stood together while Patrick spoke with Sheriff Wilson nearby. "I've never seen him so approachable." "What do you mean?" Nora asked curiously. Sarah shrugged. "He's always been polite but distant when he comes to town. Keeps to himself, conducts his business and leaves. Tonight he's actually smiling." She nudged Nora playfully. "It seems you have a remarkable effect on him." Before Nora could respond, a familiar voice spoke from behind them. "Good evening, ladies." She turned to find Preston standing there, his smile charming but his eyes hard. "Preston," she acknowledged coolly. "You look lovely tonight, Nora," he said, ignoring Sarah's pointed frown. "That color has always suited you." "Thank you," she replied neutrally. An awkward silence fell, which Preston finally broke with a slight bow. "I wonder if I might have the next dance, for old time's sake." The request startled her. "I don't think that would be appropriate. One dance between old friends is hardly inappropriate," he persisted. "Surely Mr. Ironside wouldn't begrudge you that small courtesy." "I wouldn't presume to dictate who Miss Crawford dances with." Patrick's voice came from behind her as he rejoined their group. "That choice is entirely hers." Nora could feel the tension radiating between the two men as they regarded each other with barely concealed animosity. Preston, with his smooth good looks and tailored suit, seemed almost boyish next to Patrick's weathered strength and quiet authority. "Well, Nora," Preston prompted, "one dance." She hesitated, torn between the desire to avoid conflict and the instinct to maintain distance from the man who had hurt her so deeply. In the end, it was the steady confidence in Patrick's gaze that decided her. "No, thank you, Preston," she said firmly. "I believe this dance belongs to Mr. Ironside." Relief and something warmer flickered in Patrick's blue eyes as Preston's face tightened with barely suppressed anger. Without another word, the banker's son turned and walked away, his back rigid with injured pride. "You didn't have to refuse him on my account," Patrick said quietly as he led her back to the dance floor. "I didn't," she assured him, meeting his gaze directly. I refused him because I have no desire to dance with Preston Matthews, not now or ever again. The music began, a slower waltz this time, and as Patrick drew her closer than strictly proper, Nora felt a sense of rightness that had been missing in all her interactions with Preston. Here, in the circle of Patrick's arms, with his steady heartbeat beneath her hand and his eyes holding hers with undisguised admiration, she knew with sudden clarity that her heart had made its choice long before her mind had acknowledged it. As the evening drew to a close, Patrick escorted her home, the wagon moving slowly through the quiet streets of Helena. The night air was cool, and he wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, his hand lingering briefly at her neck in a touch that sent warmth cascading through her. "I enjoyed tonight," she said softly as they approached her home. "Thank you for asking me." "The pleasure was entirely mine," he replied. "Though I fear I've given the gossips fresh material for weeks to come." She smiled at that. "Let them talk. I find I care less and less what others think." He brought the wagon to a stop in front of her house, where a lamp still burned in the front window, her father waiting up, no doubt. Before helping her down, Patrick turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "Nora, I've been as patient as I know how to be," he began, his voice low and intense. "I've tried to give you time to heal, to be certain of your feelings, but I find myself unable to maintain such restraint indefinitely." Her breath caught at the naked emotion in his voice. "What are you saying, Patrick?" "I'm saying that I'm in love with you," he stated simply, the words falling between them like stones in still water. "I have been since that day by the creek, when you stood there in your torn wedding dress with your chin up and your eyes full of unshed tears, refusing to be broken by what had happened to you." Nora felt the world narrow to this moment, this confession, this man whose honesty and strength had steadily rebuilt her faith in love when she'd thought it shattered beyond repair. "I don't expect you to return the sentiment yet," he continued when she remained silent, stunned by his declaration. "But I needed you to know the truth of my feelings. No more uncertainty, no more careful distance. I love you, Nora Crawford, and I want to court you with the intention of making you my wife, when you're ready." The directness of his proposal took her breath away. There were no flowery declarations, no grand gestures, just honest words spoken from the heart of a man who meant exactly what he said. "I don't need more time," she said finally, her own voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "What I felt for Preston was a girl's infatuation, built on dreams and promises. What I feel for you is a woman's love, built on respect and understanding." She took a deep breath. "I love you too, Patrick. I think perhaps I have since you told me my almost wedding was your gain." The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, slow, powerful, illuminating. Without a word, he leaned forward, his hand coming up to cradle her cheek as his lips met hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with the release of long, restrained emotion. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Your father will be coming out with his shotgun if we don't move soon," he murmured. Nora laughed softly. "Then you'd better help me down and ask his permission to court me properly." "Tomorrow," he promised, stealing another quick kiss before releasing her. "Tonight, I just want to savor the knowledge that you love me too." As Patrick helped her from the wagon and walked her to her door, Nora felt a sense of peace and rightness that had been absent in all her months with Preston. The path ahead might not be smooth, there would be gossip to weather, Preston's continued presence in town to navigate, and the challenges of merging two independent lives, but she faced it with confidence, secure in the knowledge that Patrick would stand beside her through whatever came. At the door, he kissed her once more, briefly but with promise, before bidding her good night. Nora watched him drive away, her heart full. When she turned to enter the house, she found her father waiting in the parlor, his expression a mixture of concern and resignation. "I take it Mr. Ironside has declared himself?" George asked, noting her flushed cheeks and bright eyes. "He has," she confirmed. "He'll be calling on you tomorrow to ask permission to court me formally." Her father nodded slowly. "And you're certain this is what you want?" "It's been such a short time since I discovered Preston wasn't the man I thought he was," Nora finished for him. "Yes, father, I'm certain. Patrick is everything Preston only pretended to be: honest, honorable, steadfast." George studied his daughter's face, then sighed. "You're a grown woman, Nora. If you believe Mr. Ironside is worthy of your affection, I won't stand in your way." "Thank you," she said, crossing to kiss his weathered cheek. "I believe he is more than worthy." The following morning, Patrick arrived promptly at 10, dressed in his best suit and hat in hand, to formally request George Crawford's permission to court Nora. The men sequestered themselves in the parlor while Nora and her mother busied themselves in the kitchen, pretending not to listen to the murmur of voices through the closed door. When they emerged some time later, both wore expressions of satisfaction that told Nora all she needed to know. Patrick's eyes sought hers immediately, a smile tugging at his mouth. "Your father has granted his permission," he informed her, his voice carrying a note of pride. "With certain conditions, of course." "Of course," she echoed, unable to suppress her own smile. "And those would be—" "Nothing unreasonable," her father interjected. "A proper courtship period of at least 3 months before any engagement is announced. Regular Sunday dinners here so we can become better acquainted. And Mr. Ironside has agreed that any future visits to his ranch will include a chaperone until such time as your status changes." "Very traditional," Nora commented, though she couldn't find it in herself to object to the sensible precautions. "I believe in doing things properly," Patrick said, his eyes never leaving hers. "Especially when it matters most." The following weeks unfolded like a dream for Nora. Patrick called on her regularly, taking her for drives in his wagon, accompanying her to church services and community events, and joining her family for dinner each Sunday as promised. Their courtship became the talk of Helena, gradually overshadowing the scandal of her abandoned wedding. Preston Matthews made several attempts to speak with Nora privately during this period, but she firmly rebuffed each overture. His final attempt came one afternoon as she was leaving the schoolhouse after helping Miss Winters with preparations for the upcoming term. "Nora, please," he said, stepping out from the shadow of a nearby building. "Just 5 minutes of your time," she sighed, weary of his persistence. "What is it you want, Preston? I've made my feelings quite clear." "I made a terrible mistake," he admitted, his handsome face earnest. "I panicked. The responsibilities of marriage, of being a husband and eventually a father, it overwhelmed me." "So you ran away without a word," she finished flatly, "leaving me humiliated before the entire town." He had the grace to look ashamed. "It was unforgivable, I know, but people change, Nora." "I've changed. Seeing you with Ironside has made me realize what I threw away." "No, Preston," she corrected him gently. "Seeing me happy with Patrick has made you realize that I've moved on and your pride can't bear it. There's a difference." His face hardened. "You can't possibly love him already. It's been, what, 2 months? You're just using him to save face." The accusation stung, but Nora refused to show it. "I love him more after 2 months than I ever loved you in a year of courtship," she said quietly. "Because he's shown me what real love looks like. It's not grand gestures or pretty words. It's honesty and respect and unwavering support." "He's a cowboy, Nora," Preston said dismissively. "A glorified ranch hand. What kind of life can he offer you compared to what we could have had together?" "A life of integrity," she replied simply. "Goodbye, Preston. I wish you well, but please don't approach me again." She walked away, her head high, feeling his stare boring into her back but no longer caring what he thought. Her steps carried her automatically toward the livery stable, where Patrick had mentioned he would be arranging for new horseshoes before meeting her for their planned outing. She found him deep in conversation with the blacksmith, his sleeves rolled up and his hat pushed back as they examined a horseshoe together. The sight of him so utterly himself, comfortable in his own skin in a way Preston had never been, filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the summer heat. He looked up as she approached, his face lighting with that smile he seemed to reserve just for her. "You're early," he observed, stepping away from the blacksmith to meet her. "I finished at the school sooner than expected," she explained, not mentioning her encounter with Preston. "Is your business concluded?" "Nearly," he said, studying her face with a slight frown. "Is everything all right?" "You look troubled." His perception was both comforting and occasionally inconvenient, she thought wryly. "I had a brief conversation with Preston," she admitted. "Nothing important." Patrick's expression darkened slightly. "Did he upset you?" "No," she assured him, touching his arm lightly. "If anything, the conversation only confirmed what I already knew, that my heart is exactly where it belongs." The tension in his shoulders eased, and he covered her hand with his own. "With me?" he asked, his voice low and intimate despite their public location. "With you," she confirmed, not caring who might observe the exchange. "Always with you." The days of summer gave way to the golden hues of autumn, and as the promised 3-month courtship period drew to a close, Nora found herself anticipating Patrick's formal proposal with both excitement and serene certainty. Their time together had only deepened her love and respect for him, revealing new facets of his character: his dry humor, his unexpected tenderness with children and animals, his quiet but unshakable faith. On the final Sunday in September, Patrick arrived for dinner at the Crawford home looking unusually nervous, a state that immediately alerted Nora to the significance of the day. Throughout the meal, he participated in conversation with her parents with his usual attentiveness, but she caught him checking his pocket watch more than once. As they finished dessert, her mother's apple pie, Patrick's favorite, he cleared his throat and addressed her father. "Mr. Crawford, Mrs. Crawford, with your permission, I'd like to take Nora for a short ride before sunset. There's something I wish to discuss with her." Her parents exchanged knowing glances. "Of course, Mr. Ironside," George replied, "but have her home before dark." "You have my word, sir," Patrick promised, rising from the table. Minutes later, they were in his wagon, heading not toward town as Nora had expected, but in the direction of his ranch. The afternoon light was golden, casting long shadows across the rolling landscape as they traveled in companionable silence. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, curiosity overcoming her. "You'll see," he replied, a hint of mystery in his smile. When they crested a familiar hill and the cottonwood grove came into view, Nora suddenly understood. "The creek," she said softly. "Where we first met." Patrick nodded, bringing the wagon to a stop at the edge of the trees. "I thought it fitting," he said simply, helping her down. Hand in hand, they walked to the spot where she had knelt in her ruined wedding dress 3 months before, desperate and heartbroken. Now the creek gurgled peacefully, sunlight dappling its surface through the golden leaves overhead. Patrick turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I've practiced what to say 100 times," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "But now that the moment is here, I find myself without the words to express what you mean to me." "You don't need flowery speeches," she assured him, squeezing his hands. "Just tell me what's in your heart." He smiled at that, his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her palms. "What's in my heart is you, Nora Crawford. From the moment I found you here, despite the circumstances, or perhaps because of them, I knew you were someone extraordinary. These past months have only confirmed what I somehow knew from the start. You are the woman I want to share my life with." Releasing her hands, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box, then dropped to one knee before her. When he opened it, Nora gasped at the simple but exquisite ring inside a single diamond set in gold, flanked by two small sapphires that reminded her of his eyes. "Nora Elizabeth Crawford, I love you with everything I am and everything I hope to become. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of joy blurred her vision as she looked down at this man who had walked into her life on what should have been the worst day, and somehow transformed it into the beginning of something beautiful. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Patrick Ironside, I will marry you." His smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds as he rose, slipping the ring onto her finger before gathering her into his arms for a kiss that spoke of promise, passion, and a future they would build together. When they finally parted, breathless and laughing, she rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I could be this happy," she confessed. "His loss is my gain," Patrick murmured against her hair, echoing the words he'd spoken the first day. "The best gain of my life." News of their engagement spread quickly through Helena, meeting with widespread approval, and only a few raised eyebrows at the relatively short time since Nora's failed wedding. The Crawfords hosted a small celebration the following weekend, where Patrick was officially welcomed into the family and plans for a December wedding were discussed. Why wait until December? Her father asked over brandy after dinner, the men having retired to the parlor while Nora and her mother cleared the dishes. "November would give you time to prepare without unnecessary delay." "December has significance for us," Patrick explained. "It will be exactly 6 months since we met." George nodded his understanding. "6 months from the day you found her by the creek." "Yes, sir," Patrick confirmed. "A day I'll always consider blessed, despite the circumstances that led to it." In the kitchen, Nora shared similar sentiments with her mother as they washed dishes together. "I never imagined when I was standing alone at that altar that I would be planning another wedding so soon," she admitted, "or that I could feel so certain about it." Martha studied her daughter's radiant face. "Sometimes the heart knows what the mind takes longer to accept," she said wisely. "And sometimes what seems like a tragedy turns out to be a blessing in disguise." "A blessing named Patrick Ironside," Nora agreed with a smile. In the weeks that followed, preparations for the wedding occupied much of Nora's time. Unlike her planned ceremony with Preston, which had been a lavish affair designed to impress the townspeople, this wedding would be simpler, more intimate, a true reflection of the couple at its center. The most significant decision came when Mrs. Donovan presented Nora with her restored wedding gown during a visit to the ranch. "It's beautiful," Nora acknowledged, running her fingers over the delicate lace. "You've done a remarkable job restoring it." "It wasn't as damaged as it first appeared," the housekeeper said modestly. "Just needed some careful attention." Nora hesitated, then voiced the thought that had been troubling her. "I'm not sure I can wear it, though. It seems wrong somehow, as if I'd be carrying the past into my future with Patrick." Mrs. Donovan nodded her understanding. "I thought you might feel that way, which is why I took the liberty of setting aside some of my daughter's wedding fabric. Beautiful ivory satin that's never been used. If you'd like, I could help you create something new." The offer touched Nora deeply. "I would like that very much," she said, impulsively embracing the older woman. "Thank you." "No need for thanks," Mrs. Donovan assured her, patting her back. "It's selfish, really. I've always wanted a daughter to sew a wedding gown for." The comment, so casually made, brought tears to Nora's eyes. "And I've missed having a mother's help with such things," she admitted. "My own mother tries, but her sewing has never been her strength." Mrs. Donovan's eyes twinkled with understanding. "Then we'll help each other. I have the skills, and you have the figure to show them off properly." And so began a new tradition of afternoon sewing sessions at the ranch house, with Mrs. Donovan guiding Nora through the creation of a gown that would be uniquely hers. The activity provided unexpected opportunities for conversation about life as a rancher's wife, with the older woman offering practical advice that Nora's own mother couldn't provide. "The isolation is the hardest part," Mrs. Donovan confided as they worked on the bodice of the dress. "Especially in winter when travel is difficult, you'll need to develop self-reliance and find joy in small things." "Patrick mentioned expanding the library," Nora said thoughtfully, "and I'll have the piano. And hopefully, before too long, little ones to teach and nurture," the housekeeper added with a knowing smile. "Children have a way of filling a home with purpose, even on the loneliest days." The thought of Patrick's children brought a flush to Nora's cheeks, but also a deep sense of rightness. She could imagine them clearly. Strong, intelligent children with their father's blue eyes and perhaps her chestnut hair, growing up with the mountains as their playground and books as their companions. November brought the first snowfall of the season, dusting Helena and the surrounding countryside with a layer of white that transformed the landscape. Work on the wedding dress was completed just in time, the finished creation hanging in Mrs. Donovan's sewing room away from Patrick's curious eyes. "It's bad luck for the groom to see the dress before the wedding," the housekeeper insisted when he tried to peek during one of Nora's visits. "I'm not sure we need to worry about luck," Patrick replied, his arm slipping around Nora's waist as they stood in the hallway. "We seem to have had more than our fair share already." "Nevertheless," Mrs. Donovan said firmly, shooing him away, "some traditions are worth honoring." As the wedding day approached, Nora found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this point. 6 months ago, she had stood abandoned at an altar, her heart shattered and her future uncertain. Now, she prepared to stand before a different altar, her heart whole and filled with a love deeper and truer than anything she had known before. The night before the wedding, as she sat at her dressing table brushing her hair one final time as Nora Crawford, she caught sight of Preston Matthews on the street below her window. He stood in the falling snow, looking up at her house with an expression she couldn't quite discern at this distance. After a moment, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the white silence of the winter evening. Nora felt no regret, no lingering attachment, only a distant compassion for a man who had lost something precious through his own actions and would perhaps always wonder what might have been. She, however, had no such doubts. Her path was clear, her heart decided, her future bright with promise. December 15, 1878, dawned clear and cold, the sun glinting off fresh snow that blanketed Helena and the surrounding mountains. In her childhood bedroom, Nora prepared for her wedding day with her mother and Mrs. Donovan fussing over every detail of her appearance. "You look beautiful, dear," Martha said, her eyes bright with unshed tears as Nora stood in her completed wedding gown, a creation of ivory satin and delicate lace that complemented her figure perfectly. "Like an angel, Mrs. Donovan agreed, adjusting the simple veil that crowned Nora's upswept hair. "Patrick won't be able to take his eyes off you. Let's hope he manages to say his vows instead of just staring," Nora teased, though her own voice trembled slightly with emotion. "I've waited a long time for this day. "The right day," her mother corrected gently. "With the right man." When the time came, George Crawford entered, his eyes widening at the sight of his daughter in her bridal finery. "My little girl," he said gruffly, blinking rapidly. "All grown up and more beautiful than I could have imagined." "Don't make me cry before the ceremony even begins, Father," Nora warned, though she was deeply touched by his emotion. "No tears today," he promised, offering his arm. "Only joy." The small church was filled with friends and family, its interior transformed by evergreen boughs and white ribbons that lent a festive air to the simple space. As Nora stood at the entrance on her father's arm, she took a deep breath, savoring the moment and the stark contrast to her previous wedding day. Then the music began, and she looked up to see Patrick waiting for her at the altar, his tall figure commanding in a new black suit, his expression one of such naked adoration that it took her breath away. Unlike Preston, who had never arrived for their wedding, Patrick stood steady and sure, his eyes never leaving hers as she made her way down the aisle toward him. When her father placed her hand in Patrick's, she felt the slight tremor in his fingers, the only outward sign of the emotion he normally kept so carefully contained. "You're here," he whispered, so softly that only she could hear. "Where else would I be?" she replied, squeezing his hand. The ceremony itself was brief but heartfelt, their vows spoken in clear, unwavering voices that filled the small church with promise. When the pastor finally pronounced them husband and wife, Patrick's kiss was tender but possessive, a claiming that made Nora's heart soar with belonging. The celebration that followed at the town hall was joyous, with good food, lively music, and dancing that continued well into the evening. As Patrick held her close during a quiet waltz, Nora rested her head against his chest, content in a way she had never imagined possible 6 months ago. "Happy Mrs. Ironside," he murmured against her hair. The name heard for the first time sent a thrill through her. "Perfectly," she assured him, tilting her face up to meet his gaze. "And you, Mr. Ironside." "More than I have words to express," he replied, his blue eyes dark with emotion. "Though I intend to spend a lifetime trying." As the festivities wound down, they prepared to depart for the ranch, their ranch now. Nora reminded herself with a sense of wonder. Mrs. Donovan had gone ahead earlier in the day to prepare the house for their arrival, giving them privacy for their first night as husband and wife. Farewells to her parents were emotional but brief, her father gruffly reminding Patrick to take good care of his daughter while her mother embraced her with tears and whispered encouragement. Then they were in Patrick's wagon, bundled against the cold December night as they set off toward their home, leaving Helena's lights behind them. The journey passed in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts as the snow-covered landscape rolled by in the moonlight. When they crested the hill that revealed the ranch house in the distance, lights glowing warmly in the windows, Patrick brought the wagon to a stop. "I wanted to look at it with you," he explained as she glanced at him questioningly. "Our home, the beginning of our life together." Nora followed his gaze to the sturdy house nestled against the backdrop of mountains, smoke curling from the chimney into the star-filled sky. It was beautiful in its simplicity, a beacon of warmth and welcome in the vast Montana wilderness. "It's perfect," she said softly. Patrick turned to her then, his expression serious. "It may not be grand like the Matthews house," he began, but she silenced him with a finger to his lips. "It's ours," she said simply. "That makes it more precious than any mansion could ever be." His smile in the moonlight was all the confirmation she needed that she had made the right choice, not just in accepting his proposal, but in allowing her heart to lead her to this man, this place, this life. When they arrived at the house, Patrick insisted on carrying her over the threshold despite her laughing protests. Inside, they found the parlor warm and inviting, with a fire crackling in the hearth and a light supper laid out on the table with a note from Mrs. Donovan wishing them happiness on their wedding night. "She thinks of everything," Nora observed, touched by the thoughtful preparation. "She's been planning this day almost as long as I have," Patrick admitted, helping her remove her heavy winter cloak. "From the moment you returned that blue dress she lent you, I think she began plotting how to make you a permanent part of this household." "And what about you?" Nora asked, suddenly shy despite the months of courtship. "When did you begin plotting?" He turned to face her, his expression unguarded in a way she rarely saw outside of their most private moments. "The moment I saw you by the creek," he said simply. "Drenched and bedraggled in that torn wedding dress, with your chin up and your eyes full of defiance despite your broken heart." He brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, his touch reverent. "I knew then that Preston Matthews was the biggest fool in Montana, and that his loss would be my gain if I could just be patient enough, gentle enough, to earn your trust." The honesty of his admission humbled her. "And now?" she asked softly. "Now that I'm here, now that I'm your wife, now," he said, drawing her into his arms, "I intend to spend every day of our life together ensuring you never regret giving me your heart." As his lips met hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, Nora knew with absolute certainty that she never would. Epilogue: 5 years later, the sound of laughter drew Nora from her gardening, and she straightened, one hand at the small of her back as she watched her husband chase their 3-year-old son across the yard. Thomas George Ironside, named for Patrick's father and hers, shrieked with delight as Patrick scooped him up and tossed him gently into the air. "Be careful with your brother," she called, her hand moving instinctively to the gentle swell of her abdomen where their second child grew. "And remember, we have guests arriving soon." Patrick set Thomas down and approached her, his face more weathered than when they'd met, but his blue eyes still bright with the same love and admiration. "Mrs. Donovan has everything well in hand," he assured her, bending to press a kiss to her forehead. "She's been baking since dawn." "I should help her," Nora began, but Patrick's hands on her shoulders stopped her. "You should rest," he corrected gently. "Doctor's orders, remember." She made a face at the reminder. Her first pregnancy had been relatively easy, but this one had been accompanied by persistent fatigue that Dr. Wilson had warned her not to ignore. "Just a short rest, then," she conceded, allowing Patrick to guide her to the porch where a comfortable chair awaited. "But wake me when they arrive. I want to greet them properly." "Of course," he promised, though the twinkle in his eyes suggested he might let her sleep if she needed it. As Patrick returned to their son, who was now industriously digging in the dirt near the garden fence, Nora leaned back in her chair and let her eyes drift over the ranch that had become so dear to her. In the 5 years since their wedding, they had expanded the house, adding 2 bedrooms and a larger kitchen to accommodate their growing family. The ranch itself had prospered under Patrick's careful management, with increased cattle herds and new pasture land purchased from a neighboring property the previous year. Their life together wasn't without challenges. The harsh winter of '79 had nearly decimated their herds, and a prairie fire the following summer had threatened the ranch house itself, before a providential rainstorm extinguished the flames. But through it all, their partnership had remained strong, their love deepening with each obstacle overcome together. Mrs. Donovan remained a beloved fixture in their household, though she now had help from a young woman from town who came 3 times a week. The housekeeper had embraced her role as Thomas's honorary grandmother with enthusiasm, spoiling him with cookies and stories, while maintaining just enough discipline to keep him from becoming unmanageable. Nora's teaching hadn't been abandoned entirely. She held regular lessons for the children of nearby ranches once a week, and she had recently begun writing educational articles for a women's magazine in Denver, work she could do from home while raising her family. Her parents visited often, her father delighting in his grandson's antics, and her mother always ready with practical advice about childcare and household management. Their small ranch had been sold the previous year when George's health began to decline, and they now occupied a comfortable cottage in town where Martha kept a small garden, and George enjoyed his retirement with dignity. The sound of an approaching wagon roused Nora from her musings. She shielded her eyes against the afternoon sun to see a familiar vehicle coming up the drive, and her heart lifted at the sight. "They're here," she called to Patrick, who was now helping Thomas build what appeared to be a small fort from twigs and stones. He looked up, grinning at her enthusiasm. Right on time, as usual. Nora rose to greet their visitors as the wagon drew to a stop before the house. Sarah Wilson, her dearest friend, was the first to alight, her husband Sheriff Wilson helping her down before turning to assist their two children from the back. "Nora," Sarah called, hurrying forward to embrace her carefully. "You look wonderful. How are you feeling?" "Better now that you're here," Nora replied truthfully. "It's been too long since your last visit." 3 weeks is hardly an eternity," Sarah laughed, then lowered her voice. "Though I understand it might feel that way when you're expecting." Thomas had abandoned his fort building to charge toward the Wilson children, his small face alight with excitement at having playmates. Soon the yard was filled with the happy chaos of children's games while the adults retired to the porch for refreshments that Mrs. Donovan brought out on a tray. "Any news from town?" Patrick asked as they settled into comfortable conversation. Sheriff Wilson nodded, accepting a glass of lemonade. The railroad survey team finally confirmed the route. Tracks should reach Helena by next spring if all goes according to plan. "That will change things," Patrick observed, his expression thoughtful. "For better or worse remains to be seen." "Progress is inevitable," the sheriff said philosophically. "Best to be prepared for it rather than resist it." As the men discussed the implications of the railroad's arrival, Sarah leaned closer to Nora. "I saw Preston Matthews yesterday," she said in a low voice. "He was boarding the stage for San Francisco." "Oh," Nora replied, surprised to realize how seldom she thought of her former fiancé these days. "Permanent move or just business?" "Permanent, from what I gathered," Sarah explained. "His father's retiring, and apparently Preston decided to sell his interest in the bank rather than take it over. There are rumors he's engaged to a banker's daughter in California." "Good for him," Nora said sincerely. "I hope he finds happiness there." Sarah studied her friend's face. "You truly don't harbor any resentment, do you?" Nora's gaze drifted to Patrick, who was laughing at something the sheriff had said. His face relaxed and open in the way it only became among trusted friends. Then to Thomas, who was showing the Wilson children his collection of interesting rocks with the solemnity only a 3-year-old could muster. Finally, her hand rested on her abdomen, where their daughter, she was certain it was a girl, grew stronger each day. "How could I?" she asked simply. "If Preston had appeared that day at the church, I would never have fled in tears to a certain creek. I would never have met Patrick. I would never have known what real love feels like, or experienced the joy of building this life together." She shook her head. "No, I have no resentment, only gratitude that what seemed like the worst day of my life turned out to be the beginning of the best ones." Sarah squeezed her hand in understanding. "His loss was truly Patrick's gain," she said. echoing the words that had become something of a private motto between the Ironsides. "And mine," Nora added softly, watching as Patrick crossed the yard to scoop up their laughing son, lifting him high onto his shoulders with the ease of practice. "Most definitely mine as well." As the afternoon faded into evening and their friends prepared to depart, promising to return the following weekend, Nora found herself standing with Patrick on the porch, his arm around her waist as they watched the wagon disappear down the drive. Thomas had already been put to bed, tired out from his play with the Wilson children. "Happy?" Patrick asked, his familiar question still carrying the same genuine concern for her contentment that it had from the beginning. "Completely," she assured him, leaning into his solid warmth. "Though I was thinking about what Sarah told me that Preston Matthews is moving to California." Patrick's arm tightened slightly around her waist. "Does that news disturb you?" "No," she said honestly. "It just made me reflect on how differently things might have turned out if he had appeared at the church that day, if I hadn't run away in tears, if you hadn't found me by the creek." "I like to think we would have found each other eventually," Patrick said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Some things are meant to be, regardless of the path taken to reach them." "Perhaps," she agreed, "but I'm grateful for the path we did take, however unlikely it seemed at the time." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment longer, watching the sun begin its descent behind the mountains that had become such a beloved part of their shared landscape. Then, Thomas's voice called from inside the house, demanding one more story before sleep claimed him completely. "Duty calls," Patrick said with a smile, offering Nora his hand. "Shall we?" As they walked together into the warmth of their home, Nora reflected that this man, this family, this life was everything she had never known to wish for until fate and a broken heart had led her to that creek. Preston's loss had indeed been Patrick's gain, but more importantly, it had been hers a gain beyond measure, a love beyond compare, a life beyond her wildest dreams. And as she watched her husband settle beside their son's bed, his deep voice beginning the familiar tale of a brave cowboy and a beautiful teacher who found each other against all odds, Nora knew with absolute certainty that she wouldn't change a single moment of the journey that had brought them here.